Deal or no deal, the deal between US and Iran, and of course Israel involved with that as well. We've heard from President Donald Trump that this deal is imminent, although we have heard that before. But a lot of confidence that the Straits of Hormuz will be open on Friday. And certainly there are, for all parties, there is an interest in coming to a peaceful conclusion. To an extent, though, as long as all parties can claim that they are the victors of this. Joining me on the program now from Pillar NZ, Arian Tashakkori. Arian, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Good morning.
Firstly, just acknowledging this is your background, your culture. For you, it's not just hey, here's an interesting thing happening in the news. This is personal for you. Difficult to hold on to hope from what we've seen back and forth over the last few months.
Yeah, it is obviously very personal with basically all of my family in Iran. But one of the things that happens after years and years of back and forth and war and conflict and sanction and economic despair, I think people, including myself, but I wouldn't want to put myself in the shoes of those who are really going through it, you actually build up a lot of resilience. And I really do think that the people in Iran, the people at least, I don't know about the political structure, but the people have built a strong sense of resilience, especially those who are deeply desiring of freedom amidst all this. There is, I believe, a deep sense of resilience despite the difficulties.
When it comes to deal or no deal, we're going to have a deal in the next couple of days. We're very close to a deal. It's that cry wolf situation. There seems to be more optimism this time than in previous times. Certainly we've heard not just from Donald Trump, but from the Pakistani government, the negotiating team there. This seems to be more probable, perhaps. What's your view?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's a lot more hope around this deal. I will say that we talk in the language of a deal, but this is more a memorandum of understanding, as they call it, which I would suggest is far from a deal, but more closer to a breathing space for these parties to sit down and actually discuss. There is deep distrust between these parties, and you know what, I quite understand it. It's quite frankly very fair that there is deep distrust between the parties, but I think it will give a lot of breathing space to sit down and discuss what things are going to look like. But I don't think we should be surprised if it doesn't hold, because if you think back to the 12-day war which took place between Israel and Iran last year, that happened in the middle of negotiations. We've been trying to negotiate with the Iranians for 47 years. Surprised it hasn't worked out, and my anticipation is it might sign something today, but I don't think we should hold our breath that it's going to stick for very long.
And more of a ceasefire than a deal, more of saying, hey, can we just stop shooting each other long enough to talk about what a deal might look like in terms of Iran's nuclear program and sanctions against Iran. And certainly there's been signals that something could be done there, not just from Israel and from the USA, but also from the international community there. There's also, of course, been a lot of rhetoric about who's winning and who's losing on this regard. And as you would expect, perhaps everybody claims to be the winner. From your perspective, though, the end of hostilities under the terms that are on the table at the moment, is this a win for Iran?
We can talk about a win. It might look like a win for Iran, but we can only discuss a win if we believe that this is the end of it. And I'm not sure that this is the end of it. A lot of the rhetoric, at least from Trump, has been, oh, look, we're going to sign a deal and the Strait of Hormuz is going to open. Mr. Trump, it was open before we went to war, and maybe we didn't need to go to war. Now, a lot of people, including myself, were supportive of action against the regime. But I think if we're going to discuss victory, we should consider the fact that maybe this is not the end. You have to look at the strategic goals of the different parties. The Americans went in there they wanted the uranium out of Iran. That uranium is not out. I understand that it's probably going to be part of the deal. They wanted to break down a lot of the proxies. Hezbollah is still operating. And, so if we want to talk about victory, I'm not sure this has been victorious. But I wouldn't say it's, at this stage, and this is my personal opinion, I wouldn't say this is a loss, and I'm actually a little bit hopeful that this is not the end of it, and I anticipate that out of this deal will come other things within coming months, and even next year.
And look, this is so much more than economics, and I think for some nations, and even us here in New Zealand, can we get the deal done so that we can get petrol prices under control? So much more important than that, particularly for the Iranian people. One of the stated objectives, or perhaps unstated objectives initially, was regime change. And yes, senior leaders in the Iranian regime have been killed, but no regime change. Nothing really has changed there in terms of freedom for the people of Iran. How does that sit with you personally, Arian?
Oh, look, following the commentary, there's been a lot of anger and disappointment and bitterness around this idea that this might be a deal that's signed and this is the end of it. I think if this is the end of it and that they sign something, the biggest losers will ultimately be those people who are living under this regime, who before the war started were out on the streets protesting, and tens of thousands of people died. More people died in the space of 3 days at the hands of the regime than have died during the span of this conflict, which is quite telling. And so if this is the end, I think the biggest losers will be the people of Iran. But we've seen some very interesting developments, even with the signing of this, is that as there's been negotiations happening with the Americans, the hardliners, who are very anti-America, very anti-Israel, and very anti-negotiation, have been calling out the people, the Iranians who have been negotiating. And so I think one of the, if you want to say a small victory that's taken place in Iran, is that we're seeing a little bit of a separation between those extreme religious hardliners and those who are maybe a little bit more pragmatic, politically minded, and maybe a little bit more open to freedom, maybe for the sake of maintaining their own power. But that's an interesting development, and I don't think that should go unnoticed. And I think as time progresses, we'll see that wedge between the hardliners, the religious hardliners, and the probably a bit more politically pragmatic individuals who are out there negotiating, that gap will grow further. So that'll be a very interesting development, and I think we should follow that.
It's certainly something to pray about as well, that not just a hope for the Straits of Hormuz to open, for the bombs to stop falling, for our petrol prices to come down, but hope for the people of Iran to have a glimpse of what genuine freedom could look like, to have the opportunity to protest, to have a functional opposition within the government system. Is that too much to hope for, in your view?
No, I think that's the only thing we can hope for. What the work we're doing here at Pillar stands for protecting individual life, liberty, and rights. That's what's initiated me and my colleagues to get out here and do this work, because we believe that individual humans are made for the sake of ultimate freedom and to be able to flourish. And one of the biggest threats to that in the modern day is an overreaching state. And what we've seen in Iran is that state has been religiously imbued with this desire to control and oppress. But my hope is, and this is what I've staked my whole life on, is liberty. And that the fight for liberty is never in vain and never will be in vain. And that's something I have faith in. I might be proven wrong, but you have to choose something to believe in and something to hope for. And I think the hope for liberty is the ultimate hope and the only thing that is appropriate to hope for. But our hope needs to be put into action. And we've seen that in Iran. We've seen people go out, and I think time will tell. But ultimately, I'm very hopeful that truth will prevail and freedom will prevail in Iran.
One of the questions, and some of the commentators are saying that, hey, this is a war that nobody wins ultimately, and particularly when innocent people are dying on both sides, it's easy to take that point of view. But just wanted to get your thoughts, because if we roll back to before the bombs started falling, before this war began, before Donald Trump cancelled the deal that was in place with Iran, have we moved forward at all, or has this war taken us backwards in your view?
That's a good question. I think Iran has certainly been emboldened. They think, look, we can exert a lot of pressure through the Strait, and we've seen that happen. And so I think it's not unfair to suggest that the regime is maybe even stronger today than it was before this conflict started. And one of the, as I said earlier, the biggest losers of this will be the Iranian people, because this regime is likely to stay in and continue its oppression of people. But again, I will just go back to, and I know it's a small matter, but that wedge between the hardliners and the politically pragmatic people, I think that will be an interesting development.
But in terms of the deal that they're working towards, the idea of, okay, lifting sanctions in exchange for Iran abandoning its nuclear program and some type of stability in the Middle East, perhaps the Iranian proxies that are attacking Israel, if not disbanded, then the investment in that curtailed. The situation as the smoke clears, is that a better situation for peace and stability in the Middle East than what we had before the bombs started to fall?
Yeah, we'll have to wait for the words of this deal to come out. At this stage, I will say no, things don't look better. I'll be very honest. And part of that is because, quite frankly, I don't think you can trust these people who we're dealing with, particularly in Iran. They're religiously minded. They have this desire to control not just Iran, but exert their influence across the Middle East. and they'll play the long game. They know that Trump is only here for 4 years. They have the luxury of a dictatorship. Trump doesn't have the luxury of a dictatorship. You might want it, I don't know. But there's a democracy in America, and in 2 years' time, Trump will be out and they'll have someone else to deal with. So I think they seriously want to play the long game here, but I don't think that we should. I'll just say very briefly, I was having a chat with someone who's worked closely with the Trump administration's cabinet, particularly on foreign policy. And he said Trump sees the world, when it comes to foreign policy, like a big monopoly board. And he's got hotels and buildings all across the world. And he doesn't necessarily care about freedom or democracy, but he just wants to keep his hotels and his buildings. And whenever someone comes and threatens those buildings, he's really annoyed. He doesn't want to protect it, but he'll go out there and protect them. And I think what we're seeing today is that Iran has for many years been threatening the Middle East, threatening American assets, threatening American bases and allies like Israel. And Trump has just had enough, and he wants to go in there and deal with it. But I think there's a lot of pragmatism that's had to play out here, and we'll see that in the coming months. And again, I will say, I know something will be signed here, and I know a lot of people are disappointed and angry, but I anticipate this is not the end. Americans have far more military assets in the Middle East today than they did before this conflict started. So we'll have to watch and wait.
And hey, one thing I learned from Monopoly, flipping the board doesn't necessarily result in a good outcome.
No, certainly not.
Arian, thank you so much for your perspective. Thanks for joining us on the program today.
Thanks, Andrew.